Several weeks ago, I took part in a big gig innovation event, which we run in Oxfordshire Business First, with around 20 people. And we asked those people, how should you manage through the COVID-19 crisis? And their ideas about what their businesses could do and the discussion we had was really, really excellent. So underpinning all that thinking was a belief that things could maybe settle down into a pattern that we could manage. And there was even a view that we could get a kind of new normal that would replace the way in which we all lived and worked. And if you just heard Jonah's session before this, she talked a bit about a new normal as well. So that's become something that a lot of people have talked about, and it's become a bit of a cliche in some ways. In fact, it's generated dozens and dozens of documents by all the major consultancies. If you just click on new normal, you'll find everybody's had a point of view on what that's going to be. Now, although I don't think anybody can really predict what this so-called new normal will be, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be about self-administered haircuts or clapping on Thursday nights. There are, however, some trends and some data that are around which are helping to shape the way we might look at the future. We might think about how to prepare, not just in the next few months, but in the longer term. And I'd like to look at some of that data and share that with you and maybe draw some conclusions about some of the things that you might be able to do in your business, might want to think about, and some of the changes you might make. One of the key things I think that comes across in everything I've read is that we're going to need to build even greater agility, speed, and resilience into our businesses because the so-called new normal just is not going to be normal. So to get a handle on that, I wanted to frame this up with four kind of big spheres of big ideas to give it some shape. The first is profit, then people, then process, and lastly, potential. So let's just start with some of the kind of big picture economics. First of all, I think most people are going to agree that this just isn't another recession like we've had before. The impact of the pandemic has really changed everything and has had some very, very deep-rooted impacts in almost everywhere. For instance, if you look at global output, the predictions are that this is going to shrink by 2.5%. And I think we're going to see some really good companies disappear and whole industries may need to be reshaped. Airlines, retail, hospitality, the whole idea around tourism, these have been some of the sectors that have been most seriously affected. In fact, if you look at airlines, the number of international flights booked worldwide dropped by 80% in March. To give you an idea of the scale of that, the U.S. Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, screened fewer than 130,000 air travelers in April. Now, last year, on the same day, they screened 2.5 million. So it's a massive drop. In retail, there's been something like 1,800 stores closed in the UK by the end of March. Even before the lockdown, hotel occupancy in London was down by 20%. And the number of people eating in restaurants had dropped by 82%. That was, as I say, before the lockdown. There aren't many, if any, sectors that haven't been impacted, and most of those are thinking about getting back on track by focusing on a number of core areas. The first is focusing on rapid revenue growth with existing customers, and that means spending time with your customers to ensure that your product or services match their current needs. In some cases, those needs may have changed really rapidly, even just over a few months. For instance, you might find that more employees are working from home, so businesses are looking for a wider range of services to keep their people connected and engaged. So folks like Jonah, HR professionals, website designers, IT, hardware providers, even companies that provide perks packages could add real value to a business now. So it's vital that we all think about how we adapt our offer quickly and maybe use some tactical pricing to introduce a new service. You might have noticed that there are a number of accountants and lawyers who've been offering free advice to help business customers to restructure and look after their cash. Well, this is really important. Cash is one of the biggest things that I think is stressing a lot of businesses. And one of the biggest benefits I've heard of is negotiating for bills to be paid in under 30 days. Now, that'll give smaller businesses a bit more headroom when it comes to managing cash. I also came across a news item recently about one of our members in B4, a local office furniture supplier who broadened his range to get some additional products like hand sanitizer and introduced prompt delivery service. And I'm seeing that in lots and lots of different companies, including pop-up shops, like a pop-up greengrocer who'll deliver to your house. But while adapting your own business in ways that'll meet your customer needs, it's really important to consider your whole supply chain, particularly if you're involved in any level of offshore sourcing. So if you're depending on anything to come from China, you probably already felt that pressure on supply. So can you build resilience by working with your customers and your suppliers to run end-to-end risk assessments? There are some processes you could get, even on the web, to sit down with your customers and your suppliers and look at the way value flows through the chain and think about, well, where are the risks and what can we do to mitigate them? More and more large companies are also interested in using these sorts of techniques to work with their suppliers to share costs on technology to build resilience. So they're looking at doing things like using digital technologies like product tracking and predictive analytics to anticipate and meet demand. These things aren't as complex as you might think, and there are an increasing number of packages and companies out there that can provide these, even for small businesses, to be able to get a better handle on what might be coming down the line in the future. Supply chains traditionally have been linear. So everybody's thought about supplier, customer. But there are significant opportunities for local businesses to think about the entire ecosystem, not just companies in their direct supply chain, but companies that are close by or close to them in terms of their value propositions. Working together can come up with some really unique ideas. I'm sure you've seen how restaurants have linked with maybe grocers and taxi firms to create online services. They're providing prepared meals as well as additional items, and they can get an entire package delivered to a customer's home for kind of a few quid. Careful margin control and trading off volume for initial profits can keep multiple businesses running while introducing some new ideas into the market. The second large-scale change I'd like to talk about is around people, and particularly around the health and safety of employees and customers. Most business websites now carry statements about the company's safety policies, but we're not really seeing how companies are proactively communicating what they're doing in the back office, in their production and warehousing measures that may be invisible to customers. But these are the things that will actually cause supply chains to break down and will cause service to fail. For most companies, the top priority has been keeping employees safe, and largely that's been down to social distancing and working from home. In Europe, 58 million people work in ways that require them to be in close proximity to others or to have significant exposure to the public. So the ideas about social distancing can be very difficult if they're not thought through really carefully. In fact, according to design experts Burra Happold, who are a local firm down in Bath, the current workplace model isn't conducive to social distancing and really needs a fundamental rethink. We need to think about having fewer desks, greater and robust communication. Whether you like him or hate him, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo recently told his entire state that it's time for them to start reimagining the workplace. They need to work out the minimum number of people who actually need to be present in an office or in a shop or in any sort of building. Those are things that are really different in the way we think about how we look at work. While working from home has been an answer for many of us, and I suppose, like me, maybe many of you have been at home for weeks on end, most employees who are doing this may be doing it for far longer than they expected. And that is not without its problems in itself. The UK's Office of National Statistics showed that over about 30% of adults in employment are currently working from home. More than half of those, however, had no previous experience of doing this. According to Bill McDermott, the CEO of a company called ServiceNow in America, over 40% of companies he's spoken to don't have a work from home policy. So things like laptops, logins, apps, and connections can all present barriers, as can isolation. Employees have issues that stem from a loss of community, a loss of social interaction, the inability to just transfer knowledge and talk to their colleagues. Just informal collaboration adds so much to the way we work, and all of these can impact productivity. The World Health Organization says that by 2030, the largest disability will be work-related stress. So when we're all separate, even our own homes can be lonely places. So what can you do about it if your people are working from home, or if you're working from home? Well, I've had a look at 3 things that might be helpful. First, anyone who can work from home needs to be fully equipped and trained to do so. You can't just assume everybody can do this. Now, the kit to work from home is relatively cheap, and there are enough tools to make it easy-ish to share data and to keep in touch. But if you don't have the tools, you can't do your job, and you can't expect people to do their jobs. Second, you need a clear policy so that everyone understands the rules. That may include provision for some social time on Zoom just to keep people in touch with each other, or providing people with some time during the day to step away from the desk and do some exercise, or even supervise the kids if the schools aren't in. These are really important factors in keeping people comfortable with working from home and allowing them to keep the focus that drives productivity. Third, it's really important to build stronger, more frequent, and more conversational communication channels. Research from the PR firm Edelman says over 60% of employees are seeing their employers as a center of gravity for important information. They trust their employers. And some of them have actually been asking for daily briefings about the virus and how it's affecting their business. I know in Unipart, our communication workload has doubled, maybe even tripled, since the pandemic began. And while keeping people safe is paramount, keeping processes running smoothly is fundamental. Before the crisis, automation was seen as a sort of double-edged sword. It threatened something like 15 million jobs in the UK, but it promised the creation of 133 million new, but very different types of jobs over the next 3 years. Coronavirus has really raised the temperature on the drive to implement automation. In one European survey, for instance, around 70% of executives said the pandemic was accelerating the pace of their digital transformation. And in 3 areas in particular, digital commerce, telemedicine, and automation, COVID-19 has really upped the digital stakes. Using machines to move and check and assemble products is pretty prolific in distribution and manufacturing, where people use so-called cobots to work alongside people almost as digital partners. But now intelligence software like chatbots and robotic process automation, or RPA, is increasingly being used to provide customer contact and more knowledge-intensive work. That was previously down to call centers. But what we're finding is rather than wholly replacing humans, these technologies are being used to automate around 30% of people's tasks. And this rise of the machine isn't just supported by companies, it's supported by consumers. Many of them say they prefer to use smartphones with smarter applications that are gathering data and learning from it. There's a recent survey by Salesforce which suggested that over 40% of UK consumers preferred online chat and support when it comes to engaging with companies digitally. And there's another quarter of those who preferred using mobile apps. Who said robots don't get sick? Well, those machines are as vulnerable to viruses as we are, and maybe even more so. It's no wonder that we're outlooking a gap of around 100,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the UK by 2022. And you know what? That presents risk to all of us. So regardless of the size or scope of your business, if you're not planning to introduce automation at some level into your business model in the short term, you may not be planning to be around in the longer term. Finally, COVID-19 has provided us with one really big upside, the biggest carbon crash on record, and the potential to do something phenomenal about the environment. In a few short months, we've seen an unrivaled drop in CO2 output. It's expected to drop by about 4 to 8% by the end of the year. Why? Well, it hasn't been enlightenment. Cutbacks on travel by air and roads and a fall in the global electricity demand have all helped to get the numbers down. And this happened before. In the 2009 recession, we also had a drop. Unfortunately, as things picked up, so did the use of energy and the CO2 emissions. In fact, they went up by something like 6% in the following year, undoing all the good work. Now, there's good commercial sense to protecting the planet. It's predicted that a greener economy could create 24 million jobs globally, while safeguarding 1.2 billion jobs that depend on healthy environmental factors. Closer to home, some people estimate that the circular economy in London could provide net benefits of 7 billion every year in industries like construction, food, textiles, electricals, and it could create 40,000 new jobs in reuse and remanufacturing. And we're probably going to see something like that, although maybe not the same scale, if we think about how the circular economy is already impacting Oxfordshire. If COVID-19 taught us anything, it's that prevention is better than the cure. Businesses now have an opportunity to rethink their business models, to rebuild value propositions, and sharply reduce their impact on the environment. Energy efficiency, reduction in travel, recycling, reducing waste. These are just some of the things, some of the drivers that can make post-COVID business planning more than just recovery. It can result in businesses becoming better at everything we do. And it's not just about getting back to whatever we think of as normal. It's about a mindset of continuously reevaluating what we're doing and having the agility, tools, and determination to make that change quickly. Maybe that's what COVID gave us as a gift, the idea that we have to recognize change is really happening faster than it ever has, and we need to look at what we have to be able to meet that change and deliver against it. Duncan Martin from Boston Consulting Group put it very succinctly. He said, part of your business planning today should be to prepare for a second crisis. So if you're looking for a new normal, it's probably about getting used to the continuous abnormal and learning to live and thrive with disruptive change.